For those of you listening to the recorded version of this, you have not lost audio. This is me being really tough on people and saying, I can be quiet longer than you can.
I can share a little story, Paul, to get.
Thank you, Stacy.
So I joined this group a little bit over a year ago, and you'll hear from me in just a few minutes. But one of the reasons that I joined this is when I did my dissertation research, it really was on the impact of internet connectivity on online students' perceptions of their online courses. And I saw firsthand through that experience how hard it is for students that live in rural areas with very low bandwidth, and what we're trying to solve here is no bandwidth, but with very low bandwidth, how hard it was for them to access their courses that were easily accessible to their classmates who lived in areas where they had better connectivity, how that experience made it difficult for them to learn. And those are students that were already having a difficult time accessing a traditional school because of where they lived anyway. So this became a really powerful group for me to be a part of, because I don't feel like as a nation we should have students' zip code dictate the quality of the education that they get, and this issue impacts that. That was even before COVID, and then during COVID we saw, like, if I wanted to see the doctor during COVID, if I wasn't dying from COVID, I needed to do that online. And now we're denying medical access to families that just can't get to the doctor or have those types of things. So this is a really important mission for me for those reasons. So there's a little story to kick off some conversation.
Nice. Let me remind you that if you have this overwhelming view of activism being something that requires hours and hours, days, weeks, months, and years of your life to make a difference, each of us comes to activism with a sense of the time we have, the time we can put into things, and being part of a community where we all work together. The strength of Shaping EDU and the Connecting Work and Learning initiative is that we all bring to the table what we have time to do. And when we don't, we're just honest about saying, can't do that, who else can step in? And so we're always looking for new partners on this. It's been a large part of our initiative. Anybody else in the group that wants to talk about what they've been doing at a small, medium, or large scale to foster broadband through your communities for work and learning, especially?
I can go.
Great, thank you.
I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I've been part of Shaping EDU for about a year now, a little over a year now. And one thing that I have been doing is talking specifically with my city council member to make sure that everyone knows about the Affordable Connectivity Program. And I've also been, through my work, distributing a lot of resources about the Affordable Connectivity Program, because it offers more funding, more subsidy for families living on tribal lands than necessarily in the city. But we do have a really large urban native population here in Minneapolis. So just, it's really important to talk to the policymakers, your city council members, and get everyone really aware of these programs, because they are so new and there's a lot of potential there.
For those of you not unfamiliar with H's work, H has been doing magnificent work in Arizona, has actually got a wonderful report out online. We've talked about that a little bit in the Shaping EDU blog. So if you're curious about this, you can go back to the blog later today and look up that piece that we did, an interview with H. And also, H, if you can quickly grab it, can you put a link to that report that we talked about, get that in the chat so that people know it? Again, the point we're making here, folks, is that this is a group that's bringing together a lot of people to do more than just talk. We share stories together, but each week in our regularly scheduled Monday or Tuesday afternoon meetings, the primary thing we do is say, what's one little step we can take today to push us closer to universal broadband? Some weeks it's magnificent. We've had people from the FCC join us, much through the connections that Lisa Gustinelli made. Had a few people at that level, which led to that Belgrade event that you saw in the video a little earlier in this session. Also had people like Robin from SUNY come in and talk to us about what they've been doing with online learning. Robin's actually in this session. We're looking at how we can build that into some of our outreach efforts to help people develop their activism skills. So it's a constantly evolving thing. And what makes this work for us is we're sharing resources, we're all working together, and we are cognizant of the fact that our meetings and our conversations and our actions do make a difference. I've seen Bailey put something into the chat here. Let me read that so that everybody can see it, especially those of you watching the archive version. Bailey says, I'm currently pursuing a project in my undergrad work at ASU regarding expanding access to education opportunities for rural communities more broadly. In this, I've been connected to the Arizona Department of Education programming around E-rate and broadband access for really remote communities across Arizona. Really exciting to see the specific technical projects that are being done that are connecting our most remote students. And Bailey, open an invitation. Anytime you want to join us, you heard Brent say this earlier, email us to Brent, to Stacy, to me, and we'll get you on that list and get you into meetings so we can talk about what we're doing and see how to make you part of the whole group. H has already put that report link in there. Robin is saying, hi, all connections made to this group are continually growing in terrific directions, which again is our reach out to you saying, join us, we need you. And Brent has got, oh, Brent, thank you. He's put the link in there for that blog post that we did. Bailey, glad to see your response that you'd love to do that. Brian's asking, did we talk about Starlink yet? Not a word, Brian. Jump in and give us a very brief description of that and how we might be tying into them to do more to get broadband for work and learning.
Jump in out loud or jump in the chat.
No, out loud, please. We want this in the
sure.
recording. We want this to be a conversational thing that gives
Absolutely.
people actions to use after they leave here.
Well, you know me, I'm not shy. I just don't want to talk over anybody.
Oh, Brian, please don't be shy.
So Starlink is Elon Musk's satellite internet project. And the reason this is important is because satellite internet, the typical computer science term is usually sucks. Satellite internet has all kinds of problems having to do with the atmosphere, having to do with the antennas, but it's usually the experience of being on satellite broadband from a user's point of view is a bit like loading every web page through a separate Java machine. It's very painful because latency is a killer. Starlink is far better at this for a variety of reasons. And Starlink is huge in scale right now. I mean, Elon Musk has been lofting tons of satellites, and some of you may have seen this play a role in Ukraine, where he offered a batch of Starlink satellite access to Starlink terminals to the Ukrainians defending themselves against the Russian invasion. So I'm not saying this is the end all and be all. I'm saying this is an amazing, and there are problems with this. Astronomers are already complaining about Starlink obscuring some visions of the sky, but I wonder to what extent Starlink offers a broadband access to academics who don't have enough of it so far.
Brian, are you in touch with people directly over at Starlink?
No, not right now.
Do you have
I was an early adopter of the Powerwall. I was the first one to use it in the state of Vermont where I was living, but I don't have any Starlink connections right now.
So we're doing things here at two levels. One is just having the conversation today to see where this takes us, but also to keep hammering home the point that we grow through our connections. So Brian or anybody else, if you know people at Starlink and you think that a conversation with them at one of our weekly meetings might open up some doors for us that will serve people better in the communities we're trying to reach, put them in touch with us. Our meetings tend to be either a working meeting where there's one or two things we address and try to produce something concrete, or we bring in people like Lyle Ishida from the FCC. We even had Jessica Rosenwasser while she was in her position as acting chair before she took over as actual chair, having been nominated and accepted for that. These conversations are leading us to magnificent places. So Starlink and anybody else, if you know people out there that we need to be talking to, get to Lisa, get to me, get to Stacy or to Brent, and let's get them scheduled on those meetings so that we can continue this. Again, I can't say enough. A session like this today is part of an ongoing process. Those of us that have been around a while, we're getting a lot from having you with us. Those of you joining us for the first time, we hope that you're taking to heart the idea. This is your open invitation to be with us as activists and to try to make a difference, a positive difference in getting broadband access out there. Anybody else want to share a story about what they are doing or what they're seeing in their communities in terms of expanding broadband and what's working at that level? This may not be your chance at 15 minutes of fame, but it certainly gets the conversation going. I would encourage you to jump in with anything you've seen or heard that you think would be useful here. Come on, there's somebody out there that has to be thinking this is so uncomfortable. I have to break the silence. We want you to be that one.
I'm going to break the silence and tell you a story.
Please.
Just because this is such a West oriented meeting, I just want to bring up the serious Northeast. So I lived in a small town in Vermont. By small, I mean not even a stoplight. And we were largely off the grid, didn't have any cell phone coverage, and we built our own broadband network. So the way that looked like was we formed a company. We then formed a co-op. And we bought space on a local college campus. We put an antenna on top of a roof of a building, and the antenna plugged into a broadband pipe coming from New York State. The antenna then turned the pipe into a radio, terrestrial radio signal, which shot up the side of our mountain, bounced off of a couple of things, including farmers' grain silos and one person's wind turbine, and then ended up in individual households where each household had an antenna to receive it. Our house is in a particularly thorny location, so we had one antenna up about 40 feet up a tree, and then from that antenna dangled a cable which went right down to the ground through a 100-foot long trench into our house. And we made it all work. My favorite point was when at the end of our street, so-called, it was completely dirt. We had a house that was off the grid, uninhabited, but had its own power supply. The power supplied a nice antenna to redistribute signal. The antenna would go offline in the winter, and it turned out that the solar iced up too much from the winter. Vermont has serious winter, and the wind turbine actually fell over during one bad windstorm. So we would have to literally snowshoe through yards of snow to get to the antenna, run a generator to fuel up some batteries, clear off the wind, all the ice off of the solar cells, and then go back. And this is like January, so I would see like moose footprints go past, that kind of thing. And it worked. It worked so well that after a few years of this, the local cable company said, "Oh, we said before we wouldn't come to you. Well, now we can," and that actually worked. They're able to bring better signal strength, and that was okay. They were lousy in terms of service, and they were community based, but it was a success. So that's a story from a very remote, difficult location. I hope it's inspiring to you, or at least terrifying.
It's both terrifying and it's inspiring. Brian, take it down to one line. What was one thing you did in that whole process that got the attention of the people that made it possible to expand broadband at the level you're talking about?
The key thing was using terrestrial radio rather than using, say, Wi-Fi, because we had longer range, and rather than using cable, because once you put the cable in the ground, you're more or less stuck with it. But with radio, you can upgrade radios very easily. They're much more cheap to do. You just walk in, swap a part out, and you're good. So we could keep upgrading as the technology advanced. So we kept, increasing speed. I think that was a key point. Across the U.S., you can find examples of these. There's something called WISPs, where communities have done this kind of thing.
Thanks. So what we're clearly hearing here is if we acknowledge the fact that we are in pain in this country in terms of having adequate broadband for work and for learning, and that what inspires us is that pain, we can extrapolate from that what I see a lot in activism at all levels, which is activism starts from a point of pain where you say, I need to do something about this. And you find the smallest thing you can do and you start working on that. Before we jump back over to Stacy for the continuation of this, I want to draw Ruben Puentedura into this because Ruben and Brian have really been in the groups that we all travel in. Great examples of saying, this is not good enough, we're going to do something. Ruben, can you describe in a few lines the situation you face with broadband? Tell people where you are and how you get around that and how essential broadband is to your work.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm in the Berkshires. So it's a beautiful area. I'm in the mountains here. Okay, people who live in the Rockies, I know these are low mountains. Okay, they're worn out, so they're older mountains, but mountains nonetheless. And it's a beautiful community. It's a rural community. So we have people living from everywhere in towns of, say, some are college towns, some are not, but you're looking at 8,000, 6,000 to 8,000 people in a town. And if you're in the center of town, the cable company may get to you. If you're outside town, the cable company will not get to you. So much as Brian described, a lot of people have either turned to satellite, which is, or formed co-ops to try to get a few satellites in some cases together to get some better bandwidth and so on. But the bottom line has been that we have a combination of it's rural, therefore it's not worth our money investment, to a last mile a scenario where you have people who are literally less than a mile off the main road of Route 7, for instance, if you're looking at one of the local roads, and yet cannot get, frankly, we have trouble getting a good copper line to get decent modem service, let alone broadband. So for us here, being able to build out broadband has been an ongoing process. As I've joked, I've been going to public hearings since the days when broadband meant we were going from a 19600 baud modem to a 14.4 K baud modem. But overall, it remains a major, frankly, largely unsolved issue in this region. So the recent initiatives make a big change. The recent initiatives, both in terms of providing for the people who do have that final mile accessibility at a reduced cost or no cost, as well as the initiatives that help provide the additional incentives to say, okay, let's get the network built out to everybody. But it makes a huge difference. And I'll mention one of the simple examples. People say, oh, we get it for students, we get it for universities and so on. But I don't know, there's this sort of image of farming as something that looks like Almanzo Wilder and the Little House on the Whatever books, which, by the way, we won't even get into the accuracies or inaccuracies of those books, but that's another story for another day. But it's this sort of bucolic image that has nothing to do with how farming, particularly resource smart farming, takes place today. And resource smart farming today uses a lot of information. It uses information of all sorts. So for somebody who's going to do not just farming, but farming that is good in terms of minimal use of resources, producing in sustainable fashion, not contributing to climate change and so on, they also need access to broadband. And that's a lot of, frankly, the community we have out here. So just a couple of stories.
I think so what we've done here, I hope, is set a compelling case for the work we're trying to do and the impact we hope to have. Let's step back one step with Stacy taking us out into the overlapping questions of how we got to this moment in terms of the work we're doing. And one of the guides that we're putting together, one of the resources we have to help you to jump in with us and make a difference. Stacy?
Thanks, Paul. So I want to segue in using a story that Brian reminded me of. One of the students when I was running an online school lived in Vermont, which is what reminded me of it. And we did a lot of synchronous video in our online school. So they would log into, at the time it was Adobe Connect, which is a very bandwidth heavy video streaming platform. And the students' connection kept coming out. And so much of what was happening in those classes was happening in those live video sessions. And so the mom was really frustrated. She contacted the internet provider, and basically what they found out is that they lived at the end of the street. There wasn't enough bandwidth left by the time they got down there for the student to stream video. And the internet service provider actually told the mom that the best way to solve that problem was to go down the street and tell the neighbors upstreet what time the students' video sessions were, and to ask them to please not log on to the internet and use it during those during those times so that they would have access. And so I remember she called me and she's like, do you suggest that I do that? And I was like, no, because I don't think I would do that if I were you. So, this is a real problem that they did end up eventually getting a better internet service out there after a couple of years. But that's part of why we do this work. So I joined this group about a year ago. Brett, Paul, and I worked together to put together a quick cheat sheet on how to become an activist. We actually built it in such a way that we want you to use it for becoming a broadband activist, because we would love to have you join our team and help with the work that we're doing. But we built it in such a way that it's useful in any source of being an activist. I'm going to put a couple other links in the chat as I talk. Honestly, if you have the first link, you're all set, because everything that I'm linking here is also linked into this Google Doc. That Google Doc is open for commenting. If you want to add something to that, please do. We want it to be a living document. It's not that Paul, Brent, and I think that we know more than everybody. We just gave us a starting place. So please use that. But our digital belonging team, we really focus on accessibility, fluency, and inclusion in digital belonging. We want to advocate for policy and systems in alignment with the Shaping EDU goals, which recognize the intersections between work, education, civic, and personal communities. We need to be connected to be able to access our society in a meaningful way. We want to foster universal broadband that's affordable, accessible, equitable, reliable, secure, and for everyone. And one of the things that's been really powerful for me about being a part of this team was one of the things that Lyle told us through his work with Lisa, which was, when I first came in, I'm like, oh, this is a big problem. How do we solve, this in a large community or in a large geographic area. And Lyle said at that point in time, we solve it one person at a time. We solve it one block at a time. You saw that he came from DC to Belgrade, Florida, where Lisa was working with a small community to help those families get connected. And that only worked because Lisa had fostered a local navigator somebody that those families trusted and believed in. So we're really not looking for, trying to solve, the entire city, the entire size of New York. We're looking to solve blocks, areas, small zip codes, things like that, where we can make a difference. And every time we solve one, we're going to be solving another problem. But we really want to make a more equitable society, and having internet access, it does that. So there's a link to tell a little bit more about what we do. The next link really talks about, sorry, I'm copying it. There's too many places where people lack access to belong in a digital society. Again, I talked earlier about medical access. I needed a parking permit for my car, I had to be able to get online to get a parking permit. I can't go in a building to get the parking permit for my car. Participating in government, access to courses, all of that requires the ability to be online, and all of that requires that we help those folks. And then the last resource that I'm going to share with you is we have a course. It's called Connecting Learners for Work and Education, Universal Broadband Access in the United States. This course is open to anyone, and it really helps provide resources and strategies and concrete actions to lead to change in your community. And so you can totally, well, thank you, Brian. You can totally take that course, but you may want to share that course with somebody. So please feel free to take access to that. This work that we're talking about here today in this meeting is really connected to what we're doing with Space Camp, because the model school is connected. The model school, people have access, they can interact with each other, they can fully participate in that community. So how do we take what we're learning here to be an activist and make that work in Mars? And with that, I want to turn it over to H, who can share firsthand her experiences about how this problem is impacting our Indigenous populations.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Just so aware, I prepared my comments in advance so I wouldn't run over time. First, I'd like to introduce myself in my language to begin this in a good way. Osio H. Trosel Dawara. Hello, my name is H. Trosel. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and I currently work remotely for the American Indian Policy Institute out of Arizona State University, where I specialize in tribal broadband. Internet access is a critical resource for our communities, and the COVID pandemic has really shown the deep extent of the digital divide in this country, but I will keep my remarks brief. Now, I did not grow up on a reservation, but I grew up in a small town in a rural area between two reservations in Minnesota. It's the kind of rural where going to the movie theater means going on a 45-minute drive. There were no stoplights in my town, and I lived on a dirt road. Not gravel, dirt, it turns completely to mud in the spring. The internet access was not great. The cell phone service was really spotty. But over the past decade, I have literally seen the results of the federal government's investment in rural broadband in my own backyard. My family now has the same type of fiber connection that I do in the city. It's the gold standard for reliability and speed. The federal government helped fund the local telephone cooperative to build this new network. There are now so many more opportunities for jobs, healthcare, and education in my hometown that my little siblings can take advantage of. As a researcher, I do have to share some statistics. I'm sorry, I know it can be a little boring. According to the Federal Communications Commission, only 79% of all tribal lands have broadband available. Even when broadband is available, not everyone can afford it. Our own studies at the American Indian Policy Institute have found that Indigenous people are often likely to rely on cell phones for internet access. And a new study from researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis found that, quote unquote, the share of households with internet access is 21 percentage points lower in tribal areas than in neighboring non-tribal areas. And the fact is, this difference is not entirely explained just by the rural remote nature of the reservations. As you can also see earlier, I posted a link in the chat to the research page on the tribal broadband, which I manage at the American Indian Policy Institute. So there's more resources and research and statistics there. I want to say that the federal government is now really investing in tribal broadband. There's finally an exclusive tribal broadband funding opportunity. It's called the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, and it has about $3 billion available. But it's still not enough to meet the need. More than 400 tribes have applied for this funding, and their projects altogether exceed that $3 billion. There's other broadband funding available, but it is not exclusively set aside for tribes. But we will get there. The federal government, states, and tribes all now recognize that internet access is key to expanding opportunities and growing our communities. My work at the American Indian Policy Institute is to make sure that people know about the resources available, the current funding, the latest research, and I would like to highlight a new program that is being developed by tribal broadband advocates. It's called the Tribal Broadband Boot Camp. These boot camps teach on-the-ground skills so that tribes can build their own networks. They're run in part by Matt Rantanen, who's a member of the board at the American Indian Policy Institute and the director of the Tribal Digital Village. I had the opportunity to attend the first one, and I saw firsthand how new wireless technology can change this landscape. This is the hard part. Building these networks. This is literally the hard hat I was issued at the boot camp in order to build a proof of concept network out in the desert in Southern California near several reservations. The boot camps teach the skills necessary for Indigenous communities to build internet networks for themselves. But the fact is, access alone is not enough. You've heard us talk a lot about digital inclusion, affordable connectivity program. Digital inclusion is really about the skills necessary to take part in this new economy. That's why the National Digital Inclusion Alliance is working with Amerind, a tribally owned firm, to advance digital equity on tribal lands. The program funds digital navigators, like the ones that Lisa was working with, to make sure that as soon as communities have internet access, they're able to take full advantage of all those opportunities for work, health, and learning. They're able to open a web browser. They're able to get to government websites. They're able to search for jobs. The fact is, this is a really exciting time for internet access on tribal lands. We do not yet all have high quality, reliable internet access, but it is a start. More support is needed, but Indigenous peoples are the ones charting our own future in this new digital space. Thank you.
Thank you, H. What a wonderfully inspiring thing to talk about the idea of we are creating our own future. We had a session yesterday that I was part of talking about the futures of libraries, making the point that you don't predict this stuff, you help to create it. See, Annie's responded to part of what H said here in the chat, saying, so interesting to hear your points, H. I live on the Tuscarora Reservation. My husband grew up here, and we built our house here a couple of years ago. We don't have broadband. We use our cell phone hotspots for internet, and finally found an internet provider that has decent coverage through a hotspot device for our house, but it's limited and expensive and not very supportive for working from home. Students in our area have so many issues with the internet, especially with internet connections, actually, especially for learning from home during COVID. And Brian's chimed in with something I think a lot of us are probably feeling. This is so infuriating. We know we can do better. And again, to bring this, to keep this on a positive note and to inspire you rather than take you down on the old Mary Poppins, let's take the tea party off the ceiling thing, we're making a difference. You can make a difference. You can join us in what we're doing. The guide that Stacey mentioned earlier gives you some points. I'm just going to summarize a couple of them here. And before we do a wrap up with Brent, I want to encourage you to think about what you can do as a result of what you experience here in the session today. Some ideas for how to be a broadband activist include identifying and using tools to find pockets in your area where broadband is needed. Get out. Talk to your community, not get out of here. That sounded way, way too abrupt. We don't want you to get out of here. We want you to get out in your communities and talk to others who are having a similar experience. So you realize you're not alone, they're not alone, and you can do something. Second point we make over and over again is identify and contact people to promote broadband access in your area where broadband is needed. And finally, identify strategy you can use to push your actions forward. It's step by step, folks. Heard H talk about things. You saw that wonderful video of Lisa, how if that story wasn't clear to you, Lisa met Jessica Rosenworcel via an online session where Lisa asked a question about broadband in her community. And Jessica and Lisa continued that conversation, bringing that over to the Shaping EDU group, which then bounced back with stories we collected and fed over to the FCC to help them what they're doing. We are at a crossroads here, a very interesting one. For many, many years now, we've talked about internet being an essential thing rather than something that's just held by some people, not to others. We cannot work and live and learn in our communities these days without access to that. And so what we're all trying to do is task ourselves with that commitment to say, we will work toward this. We know we've done it in the past. The post office was created in response to a need. Electrification took place in rural parts of the country over a century ago. We have that ability, we have that commitment. To keep this live, before we go over to Brent for final comments, what I'd like to do is encourage you to unmute yourself, put into conversation here any ideas you have for the kind of organizations in your community, local, regional, or national, that you can be contacting and we can be contacting to further the spread of universal broadband. Anybody?
I actually had a quick question.
Sure.
So I think in passing, we've mentioned a few times today, the co-ops for broadband access. We have these major telecom companies in the US that kind of hold power. Do you see the future of accessible broadband to be more of that decentralized co-op economy, kind of from the grassroots, ground up, especially as we consider like rural communities? I think about like the cultural connotations and potential mindsets that are dividing kind of our urban and rural communities, but then also perpetuating this capital division between how people can access the technology. Do you have any thoughts?
Quick unsatisfactory answers. I don't think there's any simple answer to that. My approach to it is to try to get every partner in and fire in all cylinders. I try not to look at the companies that have the reputation for having squelched the spread of broadband in communities and say, what, if anything, can we do to work with them? Remember, there are people working in those companies rather than just a big corporate entity. And if we talk as people to people, amazing conversations happen. There are a bunch of us on this call that are involved in Shaping EDU in this broadband initiative. I think if you ask 5 of us for our opinions, you get 10 different opinions. The thing is, do not give up. If you see an open door, reach out, shake a hand, ask what you can do and see what develops. Hope that helps a little bit. I want to go back to some of what I'm seeing in the chat so that we don't lose that. Oh, there's lots and lots of great comments here. So in terms of things to reach out to, Lisa's suggesting YMCA and churches. Brian, okay, Brian, we can start by blowing up the big telcos, but let us not blow up the people in them, Brian. Some of them are really with their hearts in the right place, and we can work with them given the power that they have and the spread they have. Stacy's saying churches and other faith-based organizations are a great resource. Ruben is talking about cultural organizations such as museums. I would add libraries. Libraries have been on this issue for years and years and years and provide free Wi-Fi. Let us talk to our colleagues like Diane Connery in Texas, who when the pandemic hit, immediately worked with community members and with businesses to set up Wi-Fi's in big parking lots outside conference centers so people didn't have to go to the library. That was her showing we don't make people come to the library. We take the library to them, and we need to have that mind frame, that framework for ourselves. So thanks, Ruben, with that idea of cultural organizations. They sometimes have connection resources. They go largely underused. Let's see, schools and open-minded leadership can be partners too, Stacy reminds us. Lisa's jumping in with so important to make connections first. And Lisa, this would not be a session with at least a couple lines from you. I'm going to turn this to you and then you turn to Brent for the wrap. But in a few lines, talk about what led you from being somebody who was concerned about broadband to the moment when you realized and started applying to yourself the word activist. Let's hear from you on that and then go back to Brent.
Okay, and I won't take a lot of time, but here we were meeting weekly about trying to help individuals with broadband. I believe the turning point for me is when we had my friend Alice Keeler on Twitter put out a request for stories, and I gave her my email contact. Well, the next day my email was blowing up. The next morning was a Saturday morning. I had over 60 well, over 100 emails from different people telling their story about how they were shut out especially during COVID lockdown. And I just thought I have to do something about this. Turns out I had been working anyway with mentoring some like high school students who started a philanthropy to help bring technology into underserved areas. And when we went to Belgrade and I met the pastor who was handling the after school program there, I said, are the people of your city connected with broadband? And he said, no. And he said, 60% of these people, 41% are living in abject poverty. I went and looked up the statistics, H, who likes statistics, and realized, wow, there's got to be something we can do. And luckily, we had already forged a relationship with Jessica Rosenworcel and the FCC outreach chair. So basically, it was connecting the three. But once I connected Morana St. Hilaire, the pastor, with the FCC outreach chair, and myself, we started talking, and he was able to pull in digital navigators, and we were able to have a very successful sign-up event. But the one thing because I've been asked to speak at different webinars and things about this, and one person said, oh, well, because we just put in the chat, where would you go? You'd go to museums, you'd go to faith-based organizations. And so one of the people in one of these webinars said, oh, I just identified all the Haitian churches in my neighborhood, and now I'm going to go there. What I want to say is, it's not so much about the organization that you do it at. It could just be like your community. It could be the laundromat, okay? What is the important part of it is you need to meet somebody who's embedded in that community. They don't want us to come and, oh, we're going to come save you. No, I was just a facilitator of this. You want to meet someone who's embedded in the community and empower them to get the people that they have connections with to help to sign up the underserved. And no matter where you do it, that, to me, if somebody said to me, what's the one piece of advice, the one most important thing, having lived through this, is even if it is a museum, okay, find that museum curator who has helped a local after-school program for underprivileged children get free passes to come in the museum, and talk to that person. That's how it's going to work.
So let me jump in, read one last thing from chat that just came in, and then hand it over to Brent with the wonderful challenge of Brent bringing us home on this. Aaron Blumberg is observing in here. It's so important that we make the connections between organizations, libraries, museums, religious organizations, schools, arts and cultural organizations. Each of these organizations have access to different pots of funding. And there's a lot of it out there, by the way. There's a great time for that. But continue with Aaron's comment. Each of these organizations have access to different pots of funding, to different demographics of a community, and also have the ears of various politicians at various levels. We need to blow up the silos we place ourselves in. And he concludes, Lisa's right on about reaching out to embedded human resources. Brent, final comments and challenges to our audience.
Sure. And I know we're just one more time, Stacy's going to be putting in all of the links and stuff. And remember, the guide is there for you. There's lots of good tips in there for you. One of the things I want to challenge you with, and if you want to put it in the chat really fast, what is the one thing you're going to do, right? That's what it is about being an activist. It doesn't have to be picketing signs and all this other big things. One little thing, us just coming together on a weekly basis is our first attempt of being an activist. So join us with that, because never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That are the words of Margaret Mead. And I think that's a really wonderful way for us to end and think about. It was one person, Lisa Gustinelli, that decided, I'm going to make a difference. And she did it the right way, right? But she is our inspiration and our activist. And we want to take her program that she did and be able to make it so that that can be duplicated. If we can duplicate that throughout, first in the country, in the United States first, then we're really making it. But it's only together, that small group of people coming together and doing that. So please share, stay connected, join us at our meetings. If you can come one week, come. If you can't come the next week, that's okay too. You're always going to be welcome to do your part in order to make things that much more connected. You know, as we said, this problem was here before 2020. It just got a spotlight when that happened. And now we need to take advantage of that and create that universal connectivity so that we can talk to Mars when we get there. Thank you for joining us today. And if there's anything else, we can stay on.